example is something like this, where there's a kind of list of books or texts which shows a little bit what they say, but at the same time there's not an indication of what they represent for discussing a particular topic. So it's the title of the work and then a kind of description of what it is, but altogether it's very hard to understand what then is going to be done with this literature. Why are these books here rather than others? Why are they meaningful for your study? Or another case where literature kind of becomes part of a table, and then again, no sense of the debates that they represent. Hard, therefore, to really to understand the position and the positionality of the person who is kind of computing then the urban study. So, of course, it's interesting and it's a good way for yourself to maybe kind of code, let's say, and make sense of the things you've been reading, but it's a very different thing when you start commenting on a literature review in your study, which usually takes the form of something like this, where you have a paragraph where you kind of explain, therefore, why certain writings by certain authors are used. So you can see here, for example, in line 4, I propose to use the writings of Qinglin Pang, and then as she states herself, and I agree. So again, there's a kind of sense of I'm aligned with this, and the reason why is because, and blah, 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 and that kind of starts explaining. And then additional literature is brought in to explain why Qinglin Pang is not enough, and therefore there is also Lu Jia, there is also Vukovic, and there is a reflection on how this kind of could work. There's still too much in here. So again, no example that I'm showing here is to be taken as something to kind of complete all the way. But here we start seeing a kind of conversation between the various authors and why they become important, why they are brought in, because it tackles the various points that this particular course participant was planning to touch upon. Okay, then another aspect which is important is the link between the main research question and then the methods and the output. This is really kind of a crucial combination. So in some cases, the output is presented like this. So this is my output. And it's very hard to understand what then the output is. Is it a kind of collection of photographs? And why would then this be the best possible way? So there's a level of unclarity in this kind of presentation. Also because there's no accompanying text, the output is presented as such. And that's not particularly then easy for an outsider to kind of understand. Or in other cases, there's a kind of, again, a collection of images, and it says a picture containing a photo and showing differences. So again, there's too much on the page, and there's no reflection also on the output in terms of why then this output would be particularly meaningful to tackle and present your data. Here there's an indication of how the output will be presented and a kind of example, but also with a reflection more of a kind of data generation, so this kind of knowledge base sketch, but at the same time the output is not going to be the knowledge base sketch. It's rather going to be something that might be a composition of these knowledge base sketches, which are anyhow very hard to understand anyhow sketches. So what is a knowledge-based sketch is also very unclear and not explained at all, even if the example is there. And so, again, a bit of precision. Also, no need to kind of invent strange terminology, or you can also emulate and base yourself on examples, and then because that example and another example might be integrated by you, you're anyhow doing something kind of interesting and still kind of building further on the examples that you've selected. Here we see, for example, a course participant who was really, really, well, a bit too open-ended. So for the final product, the form is still up to debate. It depends on the material found. So I leave this question open. It could also be more personal. So it's of course interesting to be a little bit open to transformation, but if you don't have a clear idea from the start of where at least you would like to take it, you might get easily lost along the way. You might not be targeting, let's say, your efforts to the early June deadline that then the urban studies paper is also going to represent for you. So this kind of possibility to still experiment, but at the same time orient where you'd like to take that experimentation is quite important to bear in mind. And this is already showing a bit more clearly two particular things that would happen. So on the one hand, there would be a kind of basic cartography, and on the other hand, there would be photographic manipulation, and there's an example of how those photos would be manipulated. That's still not necessarily the final output, because it's still unclear whether it will be a visual essay, but the kind of, let's say, techniques that will be used, for example, to manipulate photography is starting to be more explicit, so it's not just left open to interpretation. And here again we see this starting to have a more kind of clear description of what a final product would be, an A2 storytelling poster that comprises sub-stories of the interviewees. And these stories are illustrated by collages and embedded in the map of the territory. And then simple text attached to the collages, and then also a scenario. So again, this is a little bit too ambitious. There's a bit too much. But at the same time, some of the way in which the interviews and an understanding of the territory are being combined is interesting. And this is a reference. So this is not what the course participant actually did, but this was the way in which then the kind of reference that the student had in mind that would then be kind of emulated, but at the same time adapted according to findings and according to the context. In fact, it says also in the caption, however, the graphic will be a photo collage instead of a hand drawing. So those are some of the things that start pointing more specifically to options. Okay, so that was the kind of set of general remarks. I wanted to show you also what could be intended by kind of creative combination or integration of data. This is actually the work. It's a long work, and again, some of these things are very complicated, but they are. This is what's called a border encyclopedia. There's a whole website connected to it, and it's by Dear Hunter, a whole artistic project connected to this idea of understanding borders from a much more embedded kind of perspective. And Dear Hunter says we are going to use cartopology. So it's combining cartography with let's say, in lived experience. So you see that there's views from above and then views from within, and they are then set up in a sequence along the journey. And so again, we've seen this in other examples as well, the kind of combination of the border as a kind of space that needs to be geographically located and understood in its kind of thicknesses, but then how the lived experience contributes to that. I know some of you are working on this front, and there are other examples, but again, this whole idea that the output can actually be then something that really works on this integration in an interesting way, and this is an example. Another example is the dialectogram by Mitch Miller, who goes on site and he combines cartography, architectural sketching, and interviews, and they're all in one product. So the interviews are actually embedded within the sketch that he makes on site each time that he visits a particular area. And it becomes actually, he kind of keeps on building on the same drawing over and over again, layering it to the point that it almost becomes unreadable, but actually has different degrees of legibility. And he too invents this term, it's the dialectogram. So an invitation to be creative, but also clarifying what are you integrating. So in this case, there's not 56 things that are being integrated, neither in the case of Dear Hunter that I just showed. But the output is this, it is this piece, and it is an integration of the various elements that then Mitch Miller works with. Okay, are there any questions on this first part? Okay, I take it.
May I ask?
Yes, of course.
Hello.
Hello.
If I already submitted to turn in extended abstract, may I have a chance to?
Yes.
Yes.
No worries about that. Are there any other?
Yeah, I have another maybe too structural, but okay.
Yes.
I don't have very clear at this point how spatial it has to be because you have mentioned that we have to somehow skip our architectural bias, like of solving and yeah, like I don't know, yeah. And at the same time that the urban studies are like this mix of different disciplines and so on. So I don't know, yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know how spatial, how like let's say mapping has to be there always. Yeah, so maybe if you can
Yeah.
remind us with that on that.
So I think this remains an urban studies course for people who have a trajectory in, for the large part, in architecture or the kind of urban planning, design disciplines. I know there are some geographers, and of course you're all very welcome. But the idea is I think one thing that we don't do a lot in our architectural training is to understand that we are not the only people who hold knowledge about the city. So urban studies is here to help us understand that there are other perspectives. But this doesn't mean that you have to forget that you're an architect and that you shouldn't mobilize architectural techniques and the design disciplines themselves as one of the potential methods. So you can have spatial analysis, urban analysis as one of your pillars, let's say, to generate a certain kind of data. But what becomes really interesting then is to actually complement it with something that is not usually part of the array of things we do as architects and designers and urban planners. So the example of Mitch Miller, I think, works in that sense because he has a kind of a spatial and architectural sketch, and then he complements it with the lived experience of things. So I think there's always a spatial component, and you're free to be very explicit on one or two or three or whatever architectural kind of conventions or urban design conventions that you want to do and use. But then what is the other pillar going to add to make that a richer way of looking at those particular sites that you plan to look at? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah? Does it? You seem a bit...
No, yeah, I was like thinking about not being so special, but yeah, I understand.
If you want to try something and not be caught within the logics of the architect, you can. The important thing is that you have two very clear and kind of complementary methods.
Okay.
So if none of them is from architecture, it's also not a problem. But then I think you just need to be clear on what they are and how they can then build something, because
Okay.
they are very different angles on a particular phenomenon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds
Any
good.
other?
Sorry.
No,
You
no,
can go first.
maybe. Sure. Okay.
Yes,
So
no problem.
basically, I wanted to ask how much space for flexibility is there at this point when it comes to the outcome, the output, sorry. Because, for example, in my case, the output is really relied on what I'm gonna take receive as information during the
Yeah.
field work.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really difficult right now to specify 100%, especially on the kind of detail level that you showed before.
I think, there is, of course, flexibility. I think the problem is if I would still try to have some ideas in mind
Mm.
of where you would like to go with it, because I know that it depends on fieldwork, but you are going to do fieldwork following particular methods and investigating
Yeah.
particular topics. So they're not all representable in the same way. They're not all going to be anyhow shown in the same way. So if you're doing interviews or if you're doing walk along, I don't know, participatory walks, or there can be many different things. But if you have already a bit of an idea of how you plan to approach the site and the kind of
Mm-hmm.
people within it, then you could at least scale down to a few options.
Okay.
But yeah, I understand, and nothing. So in this extended abstract, again, the submissions are here to support you. They are not going to be used against you, as in, oh, but you know, in the submission last week you said you were going to do that and now you're doing something different. That's not the idea. The idea is to try and invite you to, okay, in the thinking process that I am at now, I think that this is what I'm going to do, and I try to work it out as much as possible. Then of course there's going to be fieldwork, and usually things happen during fieldwork that are unexpected, and that means you change, but you can't completely change. Otherwise, you might be stuck. So I think that's how you have to see this submission. It's not going to be used against you after Easter because something has happened and your output is no longer the one you've thought to work on. So, you know, on that you can be assured. I think there was another question.
I have a question about like the final product. We're gonna have the output, like a visual output, as you show cartography and everything else, but also a written paper.
So,
or
you don't have a written paper. So either you choose for a full written paper, a kind of conventional paper, or if you have a very visual component, you will be asked to resubmit your extended abstract in its kind of final version. Because otherwise, if I have a poster and I don't know how to read it, I don't know what the contribution to literature and kind of the debates are if I don't have a bit of an accompanying text. So the idea is that the template you're using now will be readapted. So you attach it with your visual essay or your website or your blogs if that's what you're going for. Otherwise, if you go for a conventional paper, there's no need to do that.
Okay.
No?
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. If you, for example, want to be more creative and make like an artwork, is it then enough to also submit the extended abstract, or you want more text with it?
No, the extended abstract is enough.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we can try to have time for questions also later on. Now let's see if we manage to have these breakout rooms. So the breakout rooms are basically going to be the equivalent of when you sit in spaces together and start working on each other's or looking at each other's case together. So I have some pairs that I formed, and I'm going to try and see if the breakout room works. The idea is that then you would have half an hour, so don't worry about the time. That was the time if you would have been on time, but we're not, so we'll calculate 30 minutes from when the session begins. And so let me just show you the place where the kind of working document is. So basically you will be in groups, in small groups, if the breakout room technique works. And the idea is that then you will start working with each other's extended abstracts or whatever abstracts you have at this point. And you will reflect by means of 3 slides